like all of that stereotypes of how you get into it or how it happens is not, they're not true.
Right.
Some of the women were got involved because of homelessness, and that was their only option. And because so their babies didn't starve, that's how they got into it.
Okay.
And in our in our communities, they can see vulnerable. There's some horrible ass people out there,
Right.
and they can sense it, and they will swoop it up and whatever. And so, and then the oldest person that we interviewed was like 65 years old, and she was a grandmother who was taking care of her a foster care for her grandchildren, and she could not get enough money to sustain the household for the grandbabies because the parent was not around. So that's how she engaged.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today for another edition of Meet the Shoe. Today, we will have a guest from the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. Her name is Guadalupe Lopez. Thank you for allowing us to interview you today. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's so good to. I'm actually very honored that you wanted to have a visit. So, I'm
okay. We want to know everything about your organization and how you have helped the community, and any information that you have that will assist anyone as far as sexual assault, any outlets that they, anyone in the world might, or in the state of Minnesota, can use. Okay.
All right.
We'll open up to you.
Thanks. Well, we are a tribal coalition. So we started back in 2001 under the Violence Against Women Act. And so the Violence Against Women Act is a federal legislation that was put in place to help survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence, stalking, and now sex trafficking. So specifically in tribal communities, we have a different kind of relationship with the government. We're government to government, right? So we are people of color, but we're Indigenous, and we have different rights as because we were the first people here.
Right. So
that really changed it for us. So our coalition started in 2001 because there was a serial killer that was targeting Native women in Minneapolis.
Wow.
And so there was a lot of sexual assault, and there was some murdering happening. And I think community members were getting outraged on what do we want to do. Law enforcement was not helping us in the way that we needed to be supported for our relatives being harmed. So we also know that we have really high rates of sexual violence in our community. And then the racism on top of it, it leaves it where our justice is not being presented fairly to us as Indigenous people. So all of that combined for women organizing. And Native women, when we organize big time, right? Just like Black women, just like Mexicana women, all of those. Like we need to take care of our people. So they went after this funding. So it started with just like education and training to support survivors of sexual violence and all of the topics. Since then, we've grown very big, where we are now a national technical assistance provider. And what that means is that we get funds from the federal government again, where we do education and training. One of the biggest things that we did as part of a program was we did the Garden of Truth report. And we didn't have federal funding to do this specific report. We ended up getting a small amount of money from the Women's Foundation. And we knew that prostitution and sex trafficking was happening in our community, but nobody wanted to believe us because we didn't have numbers to back it up. We didn't. So we just had anecdotal information of relatives telling us or some survivors, and a lot of our relatives went missing because we know that when women are used in prostitution and sex trafficking, we disappear. And because of, like I said, racism, because of poverty, because of all of the reasons why nobody looks for us or nobody cares, or it's our fault that harm happened to us because of we're promiscuous or we were doing drugs or we were doing all whatever it was, right? So we wanted to get this story for our people. And so 105 of our sisters came forward and told their story about how they experienced and survived sex trafficking or prostitution. So if it wasn't for our community being brave enough to step forward, we would have not had been able to write the report that has changed our funding in our federal government to get help.
Okay. And as far as funding, what did they assist you with as far as that goes? Like what struggles did you have to go through as far as making sure that they gave you the proper funding?
Well, it's when you're working with the Office on Violence Against Women, it's under a cooperative agreement. So there are partners with this, right? So they have a lot to say. They get a lot of say so of how and what. So there's parameters on how we can use this funding.
Wow.
But there are organizations specifically to help women and men and transgender relatives who are being used in sex trafficking or being to escape from prostitution. We are not a direct service provider, so we are the ones that go and support organizations who are the frontline people who are doing street outreach, who are doing housing services, who are doing other services, support services. So we support those organizations. So we're like the backup for them, right? So there's like almost like different tiers on how this can help. One of the things that we're doing right now is next. We're having a sex trafficking conference in Tucson, Arizona, and it's going to be the second one of its kind. We held the first one in California, and this is going to be the second one. It's sex trafficking in Indian country and including Alaska. And so it's a 2.5-day conference, and a lot of my colleagues have put a lot of time and effort in working with getting this organized.
Okay.
And so it's going to be for law enforcement, prosecution, service providers, all of the people, like what do you need to know to help?
Okay.
So
and the signs to see that sex trafficking has happened.
Yeah, and I think so. Here's my biggest thing. When we first started to do the report, I had my own judgments or my own stereotypes or whatever I thought that media had told me or my community had told me about prostitution and sex trafficking. Like it was a choice, that it was an easy way to make money, like all of these things. But I think that one of the things that I learned the most about in listening to my relatives telling their survival stories was that it's not like all of the stereotypes of how you get into it or how it happens they're not true.
Right.
Some of the women were got involved because of homelessness, and that was their only option. And so their babies didn't starve, that's how they got into it. And in our in our communities, people know. They can see vulnerable. There's some horrible ass people out there.
Right.
And they can sense it, and they will swoop it up and whatever. And so, and then the oldest person that we interviewed was like 65 years old, and she was a grandmother who was taking care of her foster care for her grandchildren. And she could not get enough money to sustain the household for the grandbabies because the parent was not around. So that's how she engaged in survival sex. So like it's way more common than we'd like to admit, because of all of the things that make it okay. Our communities create a social, like a perfect storm for this kind of violence to be not seen and not helping the survivors.
And as far as the survivors, have you actually seen like a huge number from, let's say, versus when the Indigenous people in the beginning versus now? Have you seen like a major change in like the help that they got from back then versus now, and all of like did the outlets rise versus back then? Like it seems like back then there really wasn't a voice versus now it's like a major change. I see more Native people getting more respect because no matter what, you guys earn you deserve the utmost respect because, like you say, you were the first people. So as far as government goes, like, do you feel like they're working more towards, everything is a process, more towards, giving you your voice, giving you respect? Do you feel that?
Yeah, yes and no.
Okay.
Okay, so this is what I have to say about. So we can keep on throwing money at the problem and pretending like that's going to fix it, but it isn't going to fix it if we don't change our social norms. Our social norms of of the highest removal of Black and brown babies being taken out of homes, Indigenous babies being lost in the system of social services or things like that, that we're not addressing sexual violence appropriately. One of the there was a person who worked on sex trafficking, and I think her name is Andrea Dorkin, and one of her things that her quotes that always sticks in my head is that child sexual abuse is boot camp for prostitution. And what does that say? Like it's and so that says something to me, and not that everybody's it's. People always want to deem the person like, well, you had a different choice, or they want to say if you were involved in prostitution versus you were snatched up by sex trafficking, it almost pins us between good victim and bad victim, and that's not true.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we all have different choices, and we have all different lack of choices or pretending of what our true choices are. And so unless somebody has survived a cold winter in Minnesota homeless, they don't know what that feels like, right? Or a drug addiction because they're escaping from memories of child sexual abuse or whatever it could be, grief, trauma, whatever it is. So I think that when we're talking about our relatives, and I think what society wants us to do is pin each other against each other. They want to pin Black against Native. They want to pin, maybe Asian against Mexicans, like all of it. And we need to work together to help our people.
Yes.
Right? Because if I'm hurting, you all gonna hurt.
Right.
And that's shown, right? Because the most marginalized person, if they're not getting help, the most invisible person, we all suffer. Because I know this is one of the things that I'm learning is that Native people, Indigenous people, we are hyper invisible in the United. Like, people be like, "Oh, you still alive? Oh, damn, I didn't even know you were still alive." But yet, Black people are hyper visible in crime and news and all of this stuff. And so, like, it's on purpose.
Yeah.
It's all on purpose.
Right. I was blessed when I was younger. I have cousins that are Indian, and so one thing that I remember about the Native culture that constantly stood out, that my aunt, she married my uncle, and then they had kids, and she taught us like the Native culture as far as like when I was little. She used to make this bread.
Fry bread?
Yeah, and I was like from a baby on, like I always like held on to her always. She had really long, beautiful hair. Like, I'm getting sentimental thinking about it, because one thing about her, she would always teach us to have our voice, right? And she constantly would tell us about the culture, like, we were the first people here, and, everything in life isn't going to be fair, that she would always feel like, I guess her growing up, they wouldn't have a voice because, Native people are so calm, until you really have to really piss them off for them to, attack. And it's like, people take advantage of that. And so I would see her all the time, even if, someone would act rowdy in front of her, she would always calm the situation, and she always had, peace pipes and sage and, just everything. So I did appreciate, learning that from her. And she always would talk about how as you grow up, everything is going to be a fight. And now I understand what she means about that, is because she just felt like she never get her just due on nothing, So just you saying that's true. It's like every time any person that is a victim, it's always a but this, but that. And it's like, how can you say but?
Sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, sweep it under the rug, especially with sexual abuse, because you can't tell somebody if no means no, you know.
Exactly.
Being taken that's definitely a no, you know. And it seems like every time a person that you talk about, I'm speaking on a not sex trafficking as far as like you getting snatched away, but like being persuaded, you know what I'm saying? That's definitely a form of it as well, because you're still you're still doing something you don't want to do, still doing something you don't agree to do, but you may feel like you said being homeless in Minnesota. In the wintertime, like you'll do anything not to be cold. You'll do anything just to be in a comfortable environment and
to have food in your stomach.
Yes, definitely.
Exactly. Yeah, no.
As far as 2020, what do you want to see happen this year? As far as what do you want to see as far as law? As far as, you know, just organizations coming together to help victims of sex trafficking, what do you want to see happen?
I want more survivors to come forward to start their own stuff. I think like one of the biggest things that we learned from talking with our community was they wanted services by their own people. They wanted people who understood what they went through, so they didn't have to re-educate somebody who's like, no, I went, and no offense, and I'm not saying like college is not an important thing, but you know, like what I see a lot in my community is a lot of non-native people going to school because they love them some Indians, and then come in and then try to come and save us. No, we got our own answers. The Black community, we have our own answers. We have the Mexican community, the communities of color, we have our own answers, but we don't get the space to do our own work.
Exactly.
Because people want to come and say, this is how you do it.
Right.
So I think like I want survivors to know of and because it's not like that's I'm gonna back up a little bit, because one of the things that I personally interviewed like 36 of my sisters, right? And these were the strongest, most intelligent, bravest, fierce women I've ever met. Ever. But they were never given the opportunity to have that shine up because of incarceration. You know, like, oh, you got a record against you, or whatever, or this and that, or you know what I mean, and so there's no room for like what I did, and this is what I learned from it, or this is who I am now. Right. So I need my sisters. I need all my sisters.
Right.
To know
Definitely.
that to know their worth, and to know that we need you, because this will not stop without your voice is helping it. But I'm going to say something like this. This will not stop without our brothers stepping in and trying to stop it too. Because it's not just a lot of men. They're not the only ones causing harm. The ones that are just saying, like, I don't do that. You still causing harm because you're letting it flip and happen.
Exactly.
So just because you aren't out there pimping or buying children and using prostitution or sex trafficking or women or whatever it is, you knowing about it and still not stepping up to do something, you're still causing the harm. You're letting it happen.
Right.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a roadblock that I constantly face, as well as being a felon and just having a black mark, as they would say, against me, as far as that, and not being able to get into certain doors. And they're doing it now on the corporate levels, as far as like they seem like a high percentage of felons being in the real estate business. So they've put points and places to prevent you from even getting a home. Like, that's just something so simple, you know what I mean? And even with the high raise of rent right now, like, more women are feeling like that they have to do just the bottom things, under barrel things, just to have shelter right now, because they're like basically almost eliminating Section 8. I mean, it's there, but there's so many landlords that will not take Section 8. And yeah, of course, in any instance, there's always going to be bad where there's good. And the landlords are not accepting it, and then they'll say that they will accept it, but they want you to go through like a probation. I'm on probation while I'm living here. It's like, okay, hey, if I pay my rent and I take care of the place, that's all it should be, you know? And even though I'm a landlord and I only accept Section 8, but there's not everybody, you know, that's like me. So even with as far as the shelter, and then as far as job goes, everybody knows, like, you have this, you know, when's the last time you committed a felony? Are you a felon? You know, those type of questions shouldn't even be asked, I feel, if you can do the job. Like, that should never prevent you. But I mean, I know we may have a long time before we get there, but another thing we wanted to know, we have this segment on our show called the shoe moment, right? And so it's something that as far as the company that you represent, that may have been the most impactful or detrimental thing, like either one. What can you tell us a little about that?
Impactful. Well, I think trying to create space for our relatives. So February 14th, we have a march in Minneapolis, and that's the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. That's how it started, MMIW.
Oh, wow.
And this is for our missing and murdered relatives.
Oh, wow.
Like I said before, we have in the Black community too, we have they're not looking for our babies the same way that they look for other babies, right?
No.
I remember being very specifically little, and when there was a high profile case, being it was a young boy, was same age as me, was being abducted, and I remember clearly thinking, we were both 12 years old at the time, thinking, thank God I'm not white, because they get kidnapped all the time. But it turns out we get kidnapped too.
Yes.
They just don't come looking for us, or they don't highlight us on the news.
Right.
So now that we have social media, there's a different way that we network as people of color. And so we have a march to raise awareness, and to just to come together to organize, kind of, you know. So February 14th, that's what we do. We also recognize that our trans relatives, our trans sisters and brothers are going high murder rates and go missing too, because of the transphobia that's in our society, and so we want to make sure that they are included. And our LGBTQ relatives. So I don't know. I think that's something that that is a really high moment. So it started like 5 years ago. This will be our 5th March. It was started by community. It's led by community. People come and march. Last year, I think we had over 2,000 people come and march with us. Okay. And so I don't want it. I guess what I want to say is that I'm tired of our communities being so siloed by, well, like only Native or only Black or only whatever, and I know that it's on purpose, and so I'm really trying to step out of that myself, and making sure I invite other relatives to come join us to do this work. And what does it mean? And support them doing their work too. How do I show up for you? Not just you show up for me, but how do I show up for you, and what do you want me to do? Even if it's just to stand there or to like hand out, whatever it is, I'm there, because we need that from each other.
Yes.
And what time is that march?
11 o'clock, and it's going to be at the American Indian Center on Franklin Avenue. Yeah. And so it's, we have there's a lot of organizing done. We have a rally inside of the gym. And so I think that it's a really, come join us.
Oh, yes,
yes,
you can.
Thank you. And can you let the viewers know how to contact you?
Sure. Right now, our website is being worked on because they hacked it and they linked it to pornography.
Oh, no.
Right? But, haters going to hate. So they don't want us to do our important work. So we're actually working towards that. Okay. But we do have a Facebook page, and it's under the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. Our acronym is MIWSAC, MIWSAC. Okay. Right now, and so usually when our website is up, and it will be up shortly. It'll be miwsac.org. So that's how you can locate us. And so yeah, we have a Facebook, we have an Instagram account apparently, and then we have our website. So
Awesome.
All right. Thank you all for tuning in for another episode of Meet the Shoe.